All right, we are recording.
So just to repeat, today is the 23rd of April 2025, and today we have Nick Gates from Open Forum Europe presenting on the EU Sovereign Tech Fund proposal, followed by Sean Goggins presenting a paper on open source software lifecycle classification using CHAOSS metrics. Without further ado, pass over to Nick Gates.
Okay, can you all see my screen just fine? Okay, cool. So yeah, I think I actually know many or most of the people on this call, some who I've worked with very closely, others I'm just meeting, but for those that I don't know, my name is Nick Gates, and I'm a senior policy advisor at Open Forum Europe, where I focus on, I guess, a few things now. One is public sector adoption of open source. One is something I call open source collaboration, so kind of these conversations around open source for social good, digital commons, the internationalization of open source, our work with the UN. And then the last is funding. So I've been doing a lot of work recently on getting more funding into the open source ecosystem. And this is one project that OFE has been kind of nurturing for some years or talking about with various parties. And we're really excited to be able to present to you all what's kind of coming to a head over the next couple of months as we're in the process of developing a feasibility study for an EU-wide sovereign tech fund. And we're doing that with the full-throated support of the Sovereign Tech Agency, represented here by Paul, who's involved in our weekly meetings. So in broad strokes, I'll just kind of run through the case we made, me and Felix Reda from GitHub, in a presentation at FOSDEM. It's one that you're all likely very familiar with, but the idea is that there's a sort of tragedy of the commons when it comes to open source software. Many of these ecosystems, as you all are aware, are under-resourced, and that leads to systematic and chronic effects. This is all the type of thing that CHAOSS has been kind of measuring very well and very reliably through different metrics over the years. But needless to say, when you think about critical infrastructure scale of foundational open source libraries, applications, packages, and their effects on the ecosystem, it is rampant. And you see that through Log4j, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the recent crises that have highlighted this are ones that you'll all be familiar with. So SolarWinds, effects on proprietary software, the XZ-utils crisis, which highlighted the possibility of social engineering and the importance of community health. Recently, there's also been, in the last week or two, the CVE funding debacle, which led to challenges basically in kind of, or risks or fears that that CVE would go underreported. Yeah, sorry. Do we have a hand?
Oh, did my country do that?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
And
I
now there's
apologize
a
to the
talk of
rest
an
of the
independent
world.
foundation.
Yeah, I apologize to everyone else in a different part of the world.
And so this isn't exactly in the mandate of what a sovereign tech agency or the EU-wide sovereign tech fund would necessarily do, but it's very related, and it speaks to some of these challenges in the ecosystem. This all comes to a head at the EU level when you think about scaling up the sovereign tech agency and what that would actually look like. So in terms of the funding levels that are supporting different domains, including innovation, there is quite a significant budget set aside, and yet very little of that is going to open source. Almost none of it, actually. But a lot of it is going towards cybersecurity funding. And so our hypothesis is that that is one of the areas that we can make inroads in terms of the upcoming MFF negotiations. And yeah, Digital Europe is only 0.7% of that total budget, and they still hand out a huge amount of money. And I think it's like over 1.5 trillion that goes into digital allocations, and a lot of that's dispersed to projects at the ECCC, which is the European Cybersecurity Competence Center. Here is some figures on the budget of Digital Europe. I mean, we're basically looking at trying to make a case to the Digital Europe program for this funding, but we actually don't know where the funding is going to come from, and that's one of the reasons that we're doing the study, is we're looking at different permutations of where the investment could come from and how it's going to be set up, because there's a lot of talk of consolidation of different funding mechanisms. So we're doing a feasibility study now. I'll talk about that and what that looks like in just a moment. But here are the different parties involved. GitHub down there on the right, Felix Reda, who many of you will know, is funding or commissioning this study. And then OFE is kind of the main contractor. We are subcontracting to the European University Institute and Fraunhofer ISI, though we're all working together as partners on the project, focusing on some of the different aspects, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the high-level objectives of the study are really just to gather the actors working in this space and to kind of talk about the issues and gather more intelligence. This is something a lot of very smart people have been making the case for the last couple of years since the Sovereign Tech Fund was set up, but that hasn't really come to a head now, but we think is very valuable in the moment because there's a lot of talk of innovation funding and building digitally sovereign alternatives, but we're making a simple case, which is that let's maintain what we already have because it's going to go into a lot of that infrastructure that's being built no matter what. So we're bringing together various stakeholders to talk about these issues, and ultimately we just want to deliver a clear and coherent message. Like, we think we know, or we kind of understand a lot of the challenge already. This has been well documented across the literature, but we really want to build up a more rigorous argument across the economic, political, and legal domains. And then fostering different synergies among stakeholders. We're doing a lot of outreach and advocacy. We're reaching out to new parties, including EU policymakers, cybersecurity agencies in member states, developers and maintainers, et cetera, et cetera. Great. I have to go just one moment and answer something at the door, but I'll be right back if you all want to talk. One.
People always come to the door at the most inconvenient times.
While Nick is away, I just want to say thanks to Serkan for your extensive thoughts and notes in the Slack channel. Thanks for taking the time to share those with us.
Nick is not in that channel, right? I didn't see his name, so probably he didn't see it. So maybe it's good to share it here.
Yeah, we can ask him. We could also invite him to the channel.
Yeah, Serkan, if you like, what you could do is drop them into a question section in the notes. I'll add one, and then we have that there.
In the document, right?
Yeah, in the document, I think that's easiest then. Everyone can see
sure.
it and don't need to scroll over the chat.
And while Paul's doing that, is there anyone here who is hearing about this proposal for the first time? And raise your electronic hand. Great, Alice. I hope this is a useful session for you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that.
Welcome back, Nick.
My limited German tells me that our boiler is fixed. Okay, so these are some of the goals for our white paper, and this builds on some of what I had mentioned before. So really, we're talking about really just defining the scope of the challenge, so giving it much more kind of depth and detail, distinguishing the different types of maintenance investments, and what that would actually mean, particularly from a security perspective, given the narrative that we're building is likely going to be a bit more cybersecurity focused. Making the case for a stronger, kind of more well-researched number, so a really clear economic argument, as Fraunhofer is helping us with. Looking at the economic and legal feasibility, so the actual implementation in the upcoming MFF negotiations, who's going to make the case for that, who's involved in those processes, but then also what would an actual legal mechanism look like to make this sustainable. We'll offer different financing and governance options, and then finally make policy recommendations to help policymakers do with this kind of study what we hope they would do, which is actually use it to develop a pilot for this project or this fund. So here are the three challenges that we are trying to address that I've kind of laid out before. One is an economic challenge. This is really what Fraunhofer ISI is working on. They did a great study with OFE back in the day, which was looking at kind of quantifying the value of open source software for the European economy. And so, yeah, they're going to bring similar knowledge to this study. For the legal side, we've contracted Thomas Strines, who was previously with NYU and just moved to the European University Institute, where he actually has a great cohort of PhD researchers and master students who are going to be supporting him in kind of making the case for different governance options for the fund. And then we have the political challenge, which is really what I'm here to talk to you all about and answer questions about, which is kind of the why of the study. I think we knew that there was an argument for such a fund to exist a year ago, but it's become especially resonant in the light of the last couple months. And a lot of the conversations that are happening in the European Commission are accelerating quite rapidly. And so we think this is a really kind of strong and ready to be implemented proposal that can respond to some of those concerns. But it's clear that we need to make a very strong case and that the timing has to be right. So the economic challenge, these are some of the numbers that you might have seen: 65 to 95 billion minimum contribution to the EU economy, 8.8 trillion global estimated demand side value. Again, there's some quibbles with these numbers from different parties, but this just gives you a scope of the kind of types of impacts that we're talking about, and that'll be resonant with some of the policymakers that we'll be speaking with. There's the legal challenge. So we think that you need to look at a few different setups or categories of setups. And we're going to have kind of a bias towards the first two, but we're going to look at all of them and look at different permutations within each. So one is the scaling up of a well-resourced EU-wide version of the Sovereign Tech Agency. This could be a centralized fund. It could be a pilot project, some sort of cascade funding. It could be coordination with the ECCC. We don't really have a strong opinion on the right option, but our kind of bias is towards the centralized fund model, but there's a question of where it comes from and where it sits. There's the question of a federated setup with a funded coordinating body. So this could be something like what the IPSE had done. There's also approaches like the Digital Commons Edict, which Kayla and I were both involved with. And then there's the question of free-for-all, which is that member states can set up their own funding instruments and that there's a strong kind of encouragement to do so through some sort of economic or policy incentive that's offered by the Commission, but that there's no actual formal coordination. France has tried to, in some ways, set up a version of the Sovereign Tech Agency, but it never really got off the ground. And so, yeah, our preference is for the first two kind of approaches and looking at different permutations in there, but we also want to give consideration to, if all else fails, what are the options under the third bucket as well. And then there's the political challenge. We are hearing from a lot of people now that we've started the interviews that cybersecurity is a really interesting narrative and that it's very closely linked to the argument for digital sovereignty in some ways, but that it'll kind of give us some cover to get in the door and start thinking about getting this type of funding. We've been speaking with folks representing the Eurostack initiative. We've been speaking with people that are involved in the new Warsaw Call, which is a call for investment in cybersecurity from the Polish presidency in coordination with Hanna Virkunen from the European Commission. We've been hearing that cybersecurity is a very dominant narrative, and we're looking forward to doing more interviews with some of the European policymakers that are involved in those discussions. The argument around competitiveness, we think is also kind of important, but is kind of a secondary consideration of the study at this point. But we think that the contribution of these investments to European competitiveness, especially given the role of SMEs in kind of working with and maintaining this infrastructure, supporting it, is definitely one worth considering as well. And yeah, that's kind of where we are now. This is just a quote from the people involved in the Warsaw Call. So we're really working on a condensed timeline. We didn't want it to be this condensed, but the contracting kind of only started in January, and these things take time. So we started the study in late March, and we're looking to have a white paper by the end of June. So in time for then, we'll have a more detailed legal and economic analysis. We'll be producing that white paper that'll be based on around 15 interviews, most likely, which we've already started with a range of different kind of stakeholder profiles, including policymakers. And then we're also working on the implementation of an advocacy plan. So we've been doing, for example, a lot of outreach to different parties and communities that might be involved in or interested in the results of our study. We've engaged more with people that signed the industry letter for Eurostack, for example, and gotten several expressions of interest. A lot of people have been submitting letters of support for our consultation response to the MFF negotiations and submitting similar responses. We've had over a dozen people that have done that. So there's lots of different ways that people have been getting involved. We'll also be organizing workshops. We're going to be putting up a website, which will have all of this information kind of easily downloadable, just a very basic website. And we'll be putting out a blog, hopefully within the next hour, actually, that'll kind of lay out this argument in a bit more detail. We'll also be doing some events. For example, we have the Polish Capital Series event that we're organizing, which will be supported by the very same people that are involved in the Warsaw Call, where we'll be talking about the white paper and some of the ideas behind the white paper. Here's a little bit more around what the white paper will look like. A good model is kind of the Eurostack pitch paper. We're aiming for something that's kind of very digestible in the 25 to 35 page range. And this is where we are now. We're about a third of the way into our study. Here's some more details about our advocacy plan, some of the ideas that I mentioned just now. Yeah, that's me. Now time for questions.
Thank you so much, Nick. I was just virtually clapping. Great. So it's time for Q&A. I certainly have one question, but I think I'll pass over to Serkan, who, Nick, you haven't seen this, but we have a Slack channel, and Serkan shared extensive thoughts and questions there for you. But we've added them to this Google Doc. So Serkan, I'll pass you the mic to go through them and ask Nick your questions.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Killian. And well, thank you so much for the presentation, Nick. I was at FOSDEM. You did this presentation with Felix over there. Overall, in general, let's say the proposal is fantastic, of course, that we were hoping to have something like this for a long time, already probably since we have German SCF. But when I saw the proposal, I had some questions, and I had some remarks. I shared it in the Slack channel, as Killian mentioned. You can find I mean, I don't want to go through all of them, but you can, if you look at the document, I also copied it over there. But one question that I can ask is that we are talking about 54 million euro budget for this. Is this a number that we want to have for this entire, let's say, for this fund per year? Or are we thinking about increasing that fund in time, let's say, that budget?
The 54 million number?
In the proposal, you are talking about 54 million euro budget, right?
Yes. So that was just so we could have a number in the proposal. Something that we had to give consideration to was what is kind of the lowest number that we could provide that we think would be kind of feasible. So we basically took the initial kind of pilot budget for the Sovereign Tech Fund, and we scaled that up to the population of the EU. So basically, we took the proportion of population to the population of Germany. We just scaled that. So we consider that a kind of floor, and a very modest one, but one that you could still do a lot with. Like, for example, with the Digital Commons Edict, you're talking about a few millions in funding. So we thought that was kind of the floor that you could do something with. But most people have commented something similar to us, which is that we need a lot more investment, and we think this is a very modest amount. So the actual amount of budget we'll probably end up recommending in the white paper will be a bit higher. But yeah, I hope that 54 million number isn't the only number that people look to, but it is kind of a floor and one that we wanted to put out there because we thought that it would kind of be achievable in a certain sense. Yeah.
All right, we should take it as a starting point. Sound good? Basically, my remark was mostly about that maybe we should not only focus on critical dependencies, which is also maybe difficult to determine. I don't think there's any clear definition on what is critical or what is maybe even infrastructure is, I'm not sure whether we have it. And we are trying to exclude, let's say, end user applications. But when we talk about free rider problem, actually that's free rider problem applies to end user applications as well. So it might be an idea to use this fund to even also finance end user applications, and with the goal, maybe long-term goal of replacing proprietary software, our heavy reliance on proprietary software. I would take that as a long-term mission of this fund, let's say, not just critical dependencies and maybe cybersecurity issues, but also, I mean, basically the entire Eurostack conversation is about that Francesca Bria is throwing a figure, something like 300 billion euro fund, etc., with the focus on we have this heavy dependence on US technologies. So do you think that we can steer in that direction, that we also have this, I mean, that would be a sort of, for me, an ambitious vision for this fund, let's say. That was my remark. You can see the rest in the document.
Sure. I mean, we're speaking to various funders, including the Sovereign Tech Agency and people who have done this work, but our bias now is towards keeping the model that seems to have been proven and works, which is the model of the Sovereign Tech Agency, and scaling that. So the focus is on exactly what the Sovereign Tech Agency does, which is open digital-based technologies. So not necessarily like shiny end user software. That being said, we expect that many of the people that are maintaining some of these critical packages are people that are going to work in those companies or communities that support that open source software and end user applications. So we expect that it will kind of diversify the funding that goes into the ecosystem and have kind of other types of benefits that are indirect, I suppose. But I would imagine that the focus could be expanded over time, and we're definitely eager to hear from other people about what they want. So just for example, we developed a 3-page document that kind of summarizes how kind of open source security could be a sort of vertical, even though we actually believe it's horizontal. That's the term they're using for the Eurostack initiative. And we sent it over to some of the people involved there, and just getting a gut check on them and where they're at and what they're thinking about. Because yeah, we want some of the energy and enthusiasm from that community, which is for kind of sovereign digital alternatives and better support for end user software to be made manifest as well.
Perfect, thank you.
I think we had, I don't know, Kaylin, you choose somebody.
I'll choose, I don't know who was first, so how about...
Doesn't matter.
CHAOSS Community
Sean.
Host
Sean was first.
Sean.
Yeah.
Oh, was I? Okay. I think it's hard to tell exactly from what you're saying, but the whole ecosystem for digital sovereignty and for nurturing these kinds of things would seem that it needs to get investment from standing companies that are already working in open source in Europe, like your SAPs and Bosch and other firms, and also nurture the sort of startup ecosystem. And so I'm curious, what are the various investments that like startup, incubating, local entrepreneurship, and large scale tech companies, like what's the intended place where this will have the biggest impact?
It's a great question. So I didn't mention, but some of our interviews are being done with, I'd call them like medium to big industry players. And we're speaking with some of them who are interested in providing a foreword to the study, basically, like putting their name on it, expressing their support for it. What I'm hoping that eventually turns into over time is those same organizations actually being willing to also commit money to this type of work. I don't know if there's a specific vehicle by which that could actually happen, or if we're just kind of influencing minds and hearts at this point. But I know, for example, that, yeah, we've spoken with a few people from different organizations, and they've expressed interest in having their organizations contribute more money to this type of work and to their dependencies, some of which are just starting this work, some of which haven't done it before. Mercedes-Benz, for example, is going to write a foreword to our study. So yeah, we're very hopeful that industry will be very involved. In terms of SMEs, you know, I don't know how much bandwidth they have to put money into supporting their dependencies or to supporting this type of work, but we have heard back from a number of people, especially through the Eurostack industry letter engagement, that are really supportive of this work. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Cool. Paul, you've been more involved, so yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit cheeky of me to be asking this question. But I wondered if you could talk a bit more about how Fraunhofer are going about their economic analysis, and if there's particular metrics or indicators that they're using, and perhaps also at what level. You know, are they looking at OS projects and communities, or are they kind of looking on a sectoral basis?
Yeah, so they're looking on a higher level, much more on a kind of ecosystem-wide, but then also sectoral basis. I know that they're looking at the census 2 and 3. Yeah, the AlphaMoga list, sorry. And they're considering kind of data that they can gather from some of the projects that have been supported from that list. I know they'll probably also be reaching out to see what data you all have and what data some of the other funders have. But they are presenting to us next week with an update on their kind of latest thinking about kind of the high-level argument that they want to make. They've made very clear that they think it'll hard to present kind of like a more rigorous kind of a econometric analysis of you know, projecting into the future kind of the potential impacts, so to speak, of a sovereign tech agency, but they think they can make a much stronger case for the levels of investment.
Awesome, thank you.
Kaylan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I have a two-part clarification question about the relationship between the political challenge piece and the economic challenge piece. So first, the clarification question is, you said regarding the political challenge that the cybersecurity narrative is the one that lands the most effectively. Does that mean that in your work and campaigning advocacy work, you're going to be focusing on that factor, or are you going to, you know, highlight it and also, you know, highlight, you know, the economic argument, you know, citing those two studies that you mentioned earlier on in the presentation? And then the second clarification question is about how the economic challenge research is looking at if it's just looking at cybersecurity, and what are the economic benefits of funding, and how much funding for cybersecurity work, or does it go beyond cybersecurity? Let me know if that's not clear. If you need a clarification statement for that clarification question.
No, yeah. So my understanding is they're looking at different types of funding that have gone into open source communities to support a number of different things. But I think what is, yeah, especially interesting is the type of funding that goes into security support and then kind of like routine maintenance work. So just yesterday, I spoke with some of the folks from the Open Source Technology Improvement Fund and got some of their perspective on kind of the relationship between kind of a security-focused approach at first, but that has kind of necessarily you know, impacts on the way that maintenance is done in terms of the community. And so I expect that, you know, security-focused assessments and evaluations is a good way to get in the door with these communities, and then to provide resources that will go into general maintenance and support for projects, because ultimately what maintainers need is generally just more money and more resources to do this type of work. It's not necessarily that they need something new altogether. So I think that those types of assessments and that type of tailored support that OSTIF does could be very valuable, and it could demonstrate like a security-focused approach that still supports maintenance. But yeah, I don't know. We're kind of testing out different arguments and kind of seeing what lands. There is like a little bit of concern around kind of pushing a very aggressive and dominant cybersecurity narrative is the way to get this in the door. I think that it has to be kind of balanced and nuanced and make a case along a number of different angles. But in terms of like the portfolio of funding and like looking at where we're actually going to get funding from, I think peeling funding away that's going to go into cybersecurity already probably makes the most sense. And that's why we're going to try and lead with that. Though I don't want to be too aggressive with it because I think, I don't know, like an argument that just conflates open source investment with cybersecurity and says, you know, if you invest in open source, it'll be more secure. It isn't necessarily true. So I don't want there to be kind of long-term risks from taking a very simplistic approach to the narrative. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Well, if not, one practical question. Would you like to be added to our Slack channel for this working group?
Sure. Yeah, happy to be.
Yeah, that's where we have some conversations. I'm just conscious that being connected to so many different channels can be overwhelming. Great, well, thank you. You are welcome to stay on till the end, but no pressure. Next on our agenda, we have Sean. Sean, do you want to take over?
Sure. I
Great,
love
and
taking over. It sounds
just-
so cool.
Just a quick reminder on time, we have 13 minutes left.
It's no problem.
Great,
All,
cheers.
all academic like talks can be made better by being made shorter. Am I sharing? Which screen am I sharing? Is it just the presentation? Are you seeing?
Yeah, we're seeing the presentation.
Okay. All right. So this is a paper I just posted to xArchive this morning. I'll drop the link to the processed xArchive version here this afternoon when it comes out. So this paper looks at open source software lifecycle classification, and the idea is to, developing data wrangling techniques for what I call, or my group calls, computational sociotechnical system. And so briefly, I'm going to cover lifecycle classification and its relationship to funding impact, the subject of this group, talk briefly about classification, get into our research questions, findings, and future work. So first of all, the problem, lifecycle classification and funding impact. Sorry, I'm figuring out how to navigate here. And there, I'm touching too many buttons. My goodness, I'm sorry. I'm completely incompetent with regards to. All right, okay. When we think about what's funding, and I've had some experience, actually a good deal of experience working with scientific open source software funders and understanding the proposals that they end up funding rather in depth. And one of the things that's often missing at both the initiation of funding or the decision about funding, and as well as at the end, when we're trying to assess the effects of our funding, are what effect we have and what effect are we trying to have. And so for this group, I propose that understanding the life cycle state of different projects that might be getting funded is helpful for a funder that's building out a portfolio, so that, if your decisions are to focus on early stage things or middle stage things, then you can have some confidence about how you're directing your money. Existing classification schemes also include the CNCF's sandbox, incubating, and graduating. And so we kind of use that as a way to train what we look at. And then, of course, the aim of what we're doing in this paper is to try to scale this classification so that we can evaluate portfolios more completely and at a larger scale, because that's really what's required at this point. Open source software has been classified previously by its domain purpose, degree of corporate engagement, developers who move together. I've got a few papers on that myself. Software quality signals. I saw Johan on here earlier. I don't know if he's still here, but Johan has a really great paper that looks at metrics and software quality indicators, and then organizational structure from a corporatized contribution perspective. So what we do in the data is, or with the way that we're approaching this classification problem is, we need to use machine learning and some kind of computational modeling in order for there to be scale. Obviously, we could classify projects in a very high labor intensive way like the CNCF does. The goal, though, is to be able to create a more cursory or high level prediction or estimate of what categories different open source projects fall into, so that, again, we can apply that information to make decisions about what we fund. And I just share the definitions that the CNCF has so that you have an example, sort of a framework for what these classifiers are. So our research questions were, what aspects of open source activity are the most significant indicators of a project lifecycle stage? And then how do these socio-technical factors, so the ways that the technology and the people who are participating in the creation of technology interact with each other, often through technology, and how can we use that knowledge about how this work really happens to enhance or improve or understand the models that we generate. The data that we used, we had 106,000 repositories in an Augur database with close to 1 billion commit file changes, 13 million pull requests, just so millions and millions of records, including millions, tens of millions of issue comments, pull request comments, and pull request review comments. And so from that, we applied or did some experimental exploratory analysis with 30 different CHAOSS metrics. We landed on 17 that contributed in statistically meaningful ways to the classification. And these are listed here. Pull request, issue, contributors, and particularly new contributors. Pay attention to that one. Number of releases, and then these engagement or popularity metrics, which are often used, Forex watchers and stars. We used these different kinds of computational models, mostly because they're really good at the kind of messy data that is sort of endemic in open source software. So because there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of intricate features and interactions, we're beginning with a smaller sample. A lot of the relations are complex and nonlinear. We chose these different modeling techniques on the left. Let me pause, take a breath, see if there's any questions as we continue the last 6 minutes. I'll just keep going then. So to evaluate the model, those of you familiar with computational modeling will recognize things like precision, recall, F1 score, accuracy. Basically, to select the most suitable model, we computed all these things and ultimately ended up choosing a decision tree because it's both accurate and computationally efficient. And our findings, so this is spent a lot of time with the setup so you know what we're talking about. In terms of significant life cycle indicators, the model that we arrived at provides a solid predictive model from a statistical analysis perspective. The accuracy, macro average, and weighted averages overall are pretty good. You can see that nominally we had the most difficulty classifying incubating projects. Those are the ones in the middle. And I think that is finding the middle and defining the middle, I think, is probably the most significant challenge for this kind of work, because graduated projects tend to be quite obvious. Projects in their early stages also tend to be quite obvious. It's sort of appropriately classifying things in the middle that is, in fact, the most difficult challenge. And that's reflected in our data here. And just to get to the bottom line here, significant life cycle indicators. So in terms of appropriately or accurately classifying repositories and putting them right into the right category, the number of new contributors in a period of time is the most significant indicator by far. So in fact, everything that we know about open source and the importance of drawing and retaining new contributors is also borne out in this analysis that we did. Stars count, which has also been used in the past for a number of purposes, and classifying open source showed up average commits, also has been significant in prior studies, showed up, but then things like dependency counts, bus factor, comments per issue, all of these made some contribution with varying degrees of importance and significance in our life cycle indicators. And then getting to research question 2 in terms of the socio-technical factors, we think that looking at some of these significant indicators as continuous data helps to facilitate our discussion and understanding of how these different manifestations of project evolution through software engineering lifecycle stages in open source might look graphically. So when we consider, and you can't really see it because the way this transferred, but this is the sandbox, incubating, and graduated. And so you can see in the case of the new contributor and stars count, as well as in these other two, that the graduated projects have a significantly different shape in terms of how the data is distributed. And so, and you can see that the incubating projects are effectively very similar shapes, jogged slightly to the right, which is a greater level of maturity. So this continuous evolution, we think, provides some socio-technical insight about what kinds of different things are happening and to what extent in these different life cycle stages. And finally, getting to future work, we want to sample more projects. We're actively doing that right now. We want to consider non-life cycle application models. Training, we also want to train computational linguistic models to actually look at the text of the comments and classify projects by vibe. And I just threw LLMs in there because everybody's doing it. And so I thought we had to say that. Okay, that is the end of my presentation portion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sean. It leaves us with I beg your pardon?
Did anybody have questions while I was talking? Did I miss any questions? No? Okay, good.
Well, let's give people a second to raise their hand in case they do have a question. Okay, and if not, we can wrap up by just pointing out the upcoming events. So
Paul and Alexandros have questions, I think.
Oh, feel free to go ahead.
We have 60 seconds or something.
Yeah, I will make it quick. Thank you very much. So the only question I was having, and I think it was answered on the last slide. So you did manual labeling of the data, or how did you do that?
So we leveraged the CNCF labels, which are already labeled following a process, and used the CNCF data to train a model that we've begun to apply to other stuff. But this is this particular study is just a validation of the self-classification right now. And so
how big was the data set approximately?
There's only 220 CNCF repositories in our data set. So it's it's a very small data set. But they have a great deal of dimensionality in the data compared with other projects. And so they gave us a really good training set, is what I would say.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation.
Sure. Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. This was awesome. Just 2 quick questions, I guess. Were there any, and maybe I missed this, but were there any features that surprised you in terms of their relative importance or their relation to one another, just on an intuitive level? And then in terms, yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The other question I had was in terms of the future work. I don't know if I missed it or not, but are you planning to do an XGBoost on this as well?
Yes.
Possibly?
Yes. We have. So right now, what we're doing is classifying using a set of criteria to code a larger set of training data so that we can apply these models across a larger collection of repositories. And I forgot your first question.
Just if there were any features and their importance that kind of surprised you, because the new contributor count is so outstanding.
That like I expected it if I was, beforehand, but I did not expect it to be as significant a contributor to the classification model. And I think that's a CHAOSS metric and if it's we use the CHAOSS way of measuring new contributors, so you can look up that metric definition. It has parameters around it with regards to when the person first contributed, and then a span of like, I think 1 to 3 years, depending how you parameterize it, of non-contribution, where you would quote unquote become a new contributor again, so to speak. And that's all in the CHAOSS definition, which I can link in the Slack chat, along with the xArchive paper when that comes out later today.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your attention.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean, for sharing that. Just we're at time, so I'll just wrap up by reminding folks of upcoming events. So there's Open Source Summit North America in late June. And there's going to be a CHAOSScon North America side event on the 26th of June. There's also Open Source Summit EU in late August. The call for proposals is already closed, but you can still sign up. And then the last one is UN Open Source Week in mid-June, and registrations are still open. Paul, would you like to add anything about that event?
About the UN Open Source Week? Yeah, sure. For those of you who don't know, it's going to be a series of events at the UN, broadly along the sort of auspices of promoting OS as a kind of digital commons. They're also planning to include a hackathon, where I think ideally they'd like to bring maintainers and communities together in person. Including some topics around maintenance, governance, and community building. Should be a lot of fun, I think. Oh, and SDA will be there in force. So hopefully see some of you there.
Amazing. Great. Well, thanks everyone for coming. We'll be meeting again in 2 weeks' time. So looking forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, stay well, stay healthy, stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.